Hey there, my name is John Stansel, and I'm going to show you how to set up a random item spawner for your game. And what I mean by that is a system that chooses random locations that to spawn items in, but that's still easy for you to determine where items spawn and where they do not. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here by creating a new blueprint, and we'll call it item spawner box. And the only component it really needs is just a simple box component, and we'll call it item spawn bounds. And the way it works is that any space inside this box is where items can spawn. Items can only spawn inside the box; they cannot spawn outside of it. So we'll go ahead and just drag that into our level before anything else. Drag it in here, and we're going to scale it. There. Now you can see all I've done is I've scaled the box so that this is where I want items to spawn. I want them to spawn in here in this little demo level I have, not, anywhere out here. So now that we have the box set up in the level, let's go ahead and make it work. Alright, so what we want to do is tell the game that we want items to spawn in a random location within a certain boundary. And how do we tell it where those boundaries are? We need to get the coordinates of the edges of the box. So to do that, we're going to get a reference to our box here, get, and we're going to get component bounds. And what that does is it returns the coordinates of the very center of the box, and box extent, which is the distance from the center to the edge, which is exactly what we want. But we need to know the exact coordinates, the x and the y, not just all three together. So we're going to break vector, separating it into x, y, and z. Do the same thing to box extent. There we go. Alright, so the simplest way to think about this is that we want the game to pick a random number between a minimum and a maximum, and that minimum being the one edge of the box and the maximum being the other edge of the box. And we need to do that for both the x and the y axis so that items will spawn somewhere randomly in that box and not outside of it. So to do this, since box extent is the distance from the origin to the edge of the box, we need to subtract that from the origin's coordinates. So I'm going to drag a subtract node out of here, and I'm going to subtract it from this, the box extent. So what that does is it gets the x coordinate of the origin, the center of the box, and subtracts the distance from the origin to the edge, and thus giving us the x coordinate of the center. And we're going to use that as the minimum x coordinate that items can spawn. So what about the maximum? Well, it's the same thing basically. We need to get the x coordinate of the center and add the distance to the edge, thus giving us our maximum. So I'm going to do a similar thing here just with the add node and connect x to it. And now that I've got the coordinates of my edges, all I need to do is get a random float and connect the minus to minimum and that to maximum. So now I need to do the same thing for the y coordinates. So let's move these over here so it doesn't get too cluttered. And I'm going to do the same thing, drag out the y coordinate of the center and subtract the the distance from the center to the edge, and that will be our minimum. And then I need to add the y coordinate of the center to the distance to the edge, and that will be our maximum y coordinate. So go ahead and do the same thing here. Random float, and that will be our maximum. And these are still just x and y coordinates. We need to make it a vector. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this one out and make vector. Connect this to y. Now for the z-axis, we want all our items to spawn at ground level. So I'm going to connect z to the same z-coordinate as the box's center, giving it so that the items will spawn at the same z-coordinate as the center of the box. But if you were doing a 3D game where the character can fly around in three-dimensional space, you would just do the same thing here for the z-coordinate and connect it there, and then you'd have items spawning in 3 dimensions instead of just 2. But that's not what we're doing here, so I'm just going to go ahead and connect that. So now we need to make it actually spawn something. So I'm going to place a spawn actor from class node. And for this, I'm assuming you already have your item classes set up. So what I'm going to spawn is just a test ball, which is just a simple little sphere that I'm using for this example. And I'm going to connect this to spawn transform, which automatically converts it from a vector. And what this means is that when the game chooses its random x and y coordinates within the box, it will spawn the actor at that location. And now we want to connect this to an event, but I'm not going to connect it to begin play because that would just spawn one item at the beginning and that'd be it. Well, we want it to spawn items every few seconds. So I'm going to make a custom event here, and we'll call it spawn new item. And what I will connect to begin play is a timer that calls spawn new item. And we'll set that time to, let's say, well, this is just an example and we want to see it in action, so I'm going to set it to something really short, like 0.5 seconds. In reality, your game would probably have a duration a lot longer than that, but you can set your duration to whatever you want. And we're going to put looping. And I'm going to type in begin play. And there we go. So let's go ahead and see what we have so far. And it's working. It's spawning random, it's spawning test balls in random locations within that box. You can see that it's not spawning anywhere outside that box that we set up. So we have the item spawner choosing random x and y coordinates to spawn a ball. But that's really not enough, because you can see that it's spawning items right in the middle of bushes, right in the middle of trees, right in the middle of structures, and that's really not very useful. So that leads us to the second part of this, which is setting up special boxes that say items cannot spawn here. So let me stop this, and we're going to set up a new blueprint that is a box that prevents items from being spawned inside of it. So new class blueprint actor, and we will call it itemless box. And this one, the only component it needs is a box just like the one before, and that's literally it for this. It doesn't need code or anything. We're just going to set up the code inside the item spawner. So we can go ahead and close that. But first, we need to drag these boxes into the level. And we're going to move them around and scale them until there's one for every structure or object or area that you don't want items to spawn in. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put all the itemless boxes into my level. You can see I've dragged them around so that they cover all the areas that I don't want items to spawn in. I don't want items overlapping this gazebo here, and I don't want them overlapping this bush or that tree. So I put all these boxes here, and those boxes represent the areas the item spawner will avoid. Now the way it works is that when the item spawner decides to spawn an item, it chooses a random location, but instead of spawning an item right away like it does now, it will spawn an invisible collider box. And if that collider box is inside one of these itemless boxes, then it says, nope, can't spawn an item here, and it chooses a different location. But if it doesn't collide with one of those boxes, then it knows that location is okay, and it goes ahead and spawns an item there. So we're going to go ahead and set that up. Let's go ahead and open up the item spawner blueprint again, and we need to make some changes so that it now avoids the itemless boxes. So let's go back over here to the spawn new item event, and what we're going to do here is, instead of going to spawn an item right away, we're going to spawn an invisible box. There's a node for that called box overlap actors. Let me move this out of the way. Move this just up here. Okay. So let's go over these one by one. Box position is where the invisible collider box will be spawned. It needs to know where it's checking. So we want that to be the random location it chooses. And you'd think that we would connect this to here so it puts the random location there, but that's actually what we don't want to do. And I'll tell you why. Because it will use that random location to place that box there, which is what we want, but later on when it spawns the test ball, it will come from that same node and choose an actual different random location, making this pointless. So we need to make the random location an actual variable. So I'm going to add a variable here, and I'll just call it random location. And I'm going to make it a vector, and there we go. So I'm going to set that variable to this random location, and I'm going to do that before I spawn the box. Let's go ahead and move some things over here so it doesn't look as messy. Okay, so now first thing it's doing is choosing that random location and setting that variable. And now we're going to get that variable and stick it right there. And we're also now, instead of getting from these random nodes, we're going to get it from our variable when it spawns. There we go. Okay. Moving on. Box extent is how big the invisible collider box will be. And how big you want it to be is really just dependent on how big your items are. But for this example, I'm just going to set them to 40. But you'll have to adjust that in your own game based on if your items that you're spawning are really big or really small. Object types is just what kind of objects this box is looking for, and the only type of object we're looking for is our itemless box, which is a world dynamic object. So we're going to make an array and type world dynamic, because that's all we need. And actor class filter here is the specific actor that it's looking for. So itemless box is what we want. And we're getting kind of messy again, so let me go and move some stuff again. Looks good. Okay, now let's look at what it's outputting. Out actors will give us an array of all the itemless boxes that it overlapped. But since we don't have itemless boxes overlapping one another, and even if we did, that information really isn't relevant. We're just going to ignore that. All we care about is whether it overlapped one or not. So we're just going to drag this out and make it a branch and connect it to here. Okay, so if it does overlap one of these boxes, we want it to not spawn an item, we want it to choose a location again. So I'm going to drag this out and call the name of our function spawn new item. But if it doesn't overlap one of these boxes, then we know that location is okay, and it can spawn an item. So let's go ahead and see what we have. Looks good so far. It's spawning items everywhere except those areas where I put boxes. So we have here a item spawner that specifically avoids certain locations, but otherwise is totally random. So just to make sure though, let's change the duration to something really short, like 0.05. Lots of items. And yep, it's still avoiding all the little areas. So you can see nothing is getting spawned here with the bush, nothing is getting spawned on the gazebo or the chair, the trees, the doghouse, everywhere but there. So it's looking good. That's a lot of items. So what we want to do now is a couple of changes just to make it better. Right now it's only spawning one kind of item, which is pretty boring. If that's what your game calls for, then you're already good. But I'm guessing that in most of these games you probably have a whole bunch of items that you want to spawn. So we're going to make that random as well. So I've already got some just example items set up here, and it's going to choose from those 4 and randomly spawn one of them. So what we want to do for that is add an array, and we'll call it item array or whatever. And that will be an array of class references, actor class references. So choose that and click this button right here to make it an array. And we're going to compile so that we can set what actors are in this array. So I'm just going to type in the name of my items here. There we go. So now we need to go over to where it's spawning the items. Okay, let's drag this out a little bit. Now, right now, it's always going to spawn the class, the test ball class. So we want to get to this item array, and we're going to drag this out and type get. And this number is the index of the array, these right here, that it will spawn. So if we left this at 0, it would always spawn item candy. So we're going to make another random node, only this time it's random integer in range, not random float. Connect it here. And our array has 4 elements, 0 through 3, so we're going to just type in 0 through 3. And connect it here to replace the test ball reference. And now it will choose these items when it chooses to spawn. So let's go ahead and look at that. Oh, it's still really fast, but that's okay. So you can see it's choosing random items, and they're all still avoiding the itemless boxes, which is good. Okay, so we know that works. Now the other thing you can do, which is just optional, I like to do it, is make the interval that it spawns at random. So right now it always spawns an item at X number of seconds every time, which is fine if you want the game to be, predictable. Players will always know, oh, it's been a while since I saw an item last. One is due to appear now. So if an item always appeared every 10 seconds, players would be able to start to anticipate that. So we're going to make this a random span of time. So we're going to make another custom event, and we will call it decide if spawn. So what this does is it's going to, every time that timer rings down, instead of just automatically spawning an item, it's going to roll for a chance to spawn an item, and we can set that chance to whatever we want, 50% of the time, 80% of the time, 30% of the time, whatever. And that means that let's say you set that timer to 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, there will be a 30% chance to spawn an item. If that chance fails, it'll wait another 5 seconds and try again. And that way, if the item spawner feels too common or too few, you can go in and change that chance or change the duration. So I feel like that's a little easier for balancing. So the first thing we're going to do here is make this a branch. Okay. And that branch is going to be a random number that decides whether it spawns an item or not. Now, there are multiple ways to do this. I find that the easiest way is to spawn a number between 1 and 100, and it just checks if it's lower than whatever you want your percentage to be. That way, it's easy for people to understand. If you have other programmers, they can go in, working on this, they can go in and type in 90 instead of 80 or whatever, and it's easy to conceptualize as a percentage rather than just picking a number 1 through 6 or 1 through 7 or whatever. Both will achieve the same result. It's just I feel like this is a little bit easier for people to conceptualize. So we're going to get a random integer in range, and we're going to set this 1 through 100. And we're going to drag this out, and I like to put it down here just because. And it will be less than or equal to, let's just say 30%. Actually, no, since this is a test, let's make it a little higher, like 75%. So we will drag this out, connect it. Oh, if you know that you always want a 50% chance, then you can just skip this step and make a random bool variable, which will randomly choose true or false if you know that you always want it to be 50-50, but we don't. So we're going to just delete that. And so we're going to connect true to the spawn new item event, meaning that if the number is lower than 75%, then it will spawn an item. If false, it will just do nothing, and it will just wait for the next timer to ring down, so we'll just leave that blank. So finally, we need to change our timer here so that instead of spawning a new item with the timer rings down, we need to decide if spawn. And let's set that to just 3 seconds. That's pretty short considering we have a high chance of 75%, but this is just a demo. So let's go ahead and see how this looks. Wait a few seconds. There's one. And I guess it didn't pass the check that time, or it's hidden behind a tree or something. Oh, there's another. Wait a few more seconds. There's one. And there's another. So, there we go. This is an item spawner box that spawns items, random locations inside of it, but not inside the anti-item boxes that you see here. And it also spawns random selection of items at random intervals. So, that should make things a lot more interesting for your game, and I hope this has been helpful.